everyone. I want to make a short presentation. Oh, and before I go ahead, I'm Rajiv Chopra and I'm sitting in my night suit. You can see my television behind me, I presume. But I want to make a short video on the advantage of using layers in photography when you are editing and especially when you are using Photoshop. When I started Photoshop, I was terrified of layers. So it took me a while to get used to the basic concept. But let me just say that the advantage of using layers is that you go for a non-destructive process vis-a-vis a destructive process if you don't use layers. It's almost like destructive versus non-destructive testing. So I am a metallurgist, and I'm not a metallurgist now, or at least I'm not a practicing metallurgist now. But in the world of metals, we had destructive testing processes like impact testing. So what we would do is have a bar of steel, sometimes with a small notch, and we would hit it with a hammer. I'm just explaining it in a very crude manner. So we'd hit it with a hammer and then we'd measure the force that it could sustain. So at a certain point of impact, the rod would break. The other is to measure the tensile strength. You pull a rod and you keep pulling and pulling and pulling until it snaps. So when you do something like that, you are in essence destroying the sample. I want you to contrast this with a non-destructive process like X-ray or ultrasound testing. And when you are using the X-ray machine or an ultrasound machine, you don't damage the sample and it can be reused, or it can, if you are using testing a whole bar, for instance, then you don't actually have to destroy the bar. So let's take this for instance. Now what you see two images here. You see the gentleman on the left hammering some sort of a nail-like thing into the metal strip. He is destroying it. And on the right, we see another image where a drill is going into a slab of metal. And once you are using that drill, you are effectively destroying the integral structure of the metal bar or whatever substrate you are drilling. So let me contrast this with something like an ultrasound test. I couldn't find any images for X-ray or ultrasound testing of metals, so I just took two examples. The old gentleman going into that machine and a pregnant woman being tested via the ultrasonic testing. Now, you can see that these are both non-destructive testing methods because you're not going to drill a hole in the man's head or in the woman's belly to see what's inside, or to check the health of the skull, or to check the health of his brain, or to check the health of a baby. Now, this is an advantage of a non-destructive testing process. However, in the world of metals, you sometimes have to use a combination of destructive versus non-destructive testing, which we don't recommend now in photography. Now, it took me quite some time to get used to the concept of layers, and I don't know why, to be honest. I somehow acquired a bit of let's say, a brain freeze whenever I thought of layers. But then someone gave me the example of acetates. So when you place one acetate over another, the acetates themselves are not destroyed. So now if you look at the one on the left, you will see a blue dish, and over the blue dish, you will see a yellow dish. When you put the yellow over the blue, you get green. The yellow and the blue themselves have not changed. But what you have is a combination of the yellow and the blue which makes green. So that is the advantage of using layers. Layers are, for the most part, what you might call adjustment layers. So let me not complicate everyone's life. Are transparent layers over the base image, and the base image is composed of pixels. So now I'm going to switch off the presentation and I'm going to switch on or turn on or launch Photoshop, and I will demonstrate this with one particular image. So now I've launched Photoshop, and you see I have a fairly complicated work space out here. I have already processed these images. So let me open up this image, for instance. This is my background layer, which you can see here. I converted this into black and white using Nik Silver Efex Pro, and I will make a separate video on Nik Silver Efex Pro later. Then I applied a dodging layer to lighten this part of the image here, what you can see. After which I apply the clarity layer and I finish it off thereafter. The process seems simple, and it is. I prefer processes that are as simple as possible. So I'm going to close this down and let me open this one, which is not processed. I was in the Chawri Bazaar area in Delhi. I stood at the station at about 8 or 8:30 in the evening. The reddish hue is the hue from the light, the fluorescent light. I placed my camera on a tripod, and I just hoped that this young gentleman wouldn't move. He was so lost in his world that he actually did not move, or he just about moved a little bit once in a while, but that was okay. But I used a long exposure setting to create some drama in the image. Or actually, let me use a different image. Let's use this one here. So this image, you can see that there's a lot of movement with the blur because of the slow shutter speed. He himself was so engrossed in his conversation that he didn't bother about me. The only problem with this image, which I don't like and I can't do much about it, are these bright lights because they distract you. So let me just take you through the process. So this is the background. Now, what you will do if you're not going to use layers, go to Image, Adjustments, and here you go. You're going to go to the, let's say, Curves, and I have made an adjustment. All right, and it's done. So now the problem with this approach is I have changed the base image. The only thing that I can do now is actually to undo the action. I go to undo, and that's it. If I do it again, if I use another one, levels, here we have it, a dark one here. Now let me use another adjustment. Let me use curves, because I think that the dark is too dark. And everything is happening on this layer. Now, the problem that you find is that now that I have made these adjustments, I actually don't know what I have done. I am stuck. So, if I don't like what I've done, what do I do? But the only thing that I can do is to close the image without saving it. Or I can go undo, undo. Now, up to this level is fine. I just made 2 adjustments. What happens if I make 10 or 11 or 12? What happens if I actually want to change an adjustment which I made 5 steps before, but not the other ones? I can't do it. because everything is hidden here. If I save the file, the information is in this particular background layer, and there's nothing I can do about it. What I can do is I can duplicate the layer, and on the Macintosh you will use Command J. I forget what you use on Windows, but here you are. And now I can do the same thing, adjustment. I can make a, let's say, brightness contrast adjustment. Here we go. And now if I want, I can duplicate this. But now this layer has the adjustment which I've made here. So again, I'll have to do a curve. Done. Now let's assume I switch this off. Now you see, if I don't like what I've done in the brightness adjustment, now this little eyeball essentially determines the visibility of the layer. So if I turn it off, the layer becomes invisible. But now I can't do anything because I honestly don't know what I've done in the brightness adjustment that I've made, or in the brightness adjustment edit that I've made. And because I have duplicated the layer, this layer hides this layer. So even if I turn it off, it does not have any impact on the image. So this again is the destructive process. So let me cancel these. Instead, I will go to this tab on top, layer, which is layer, new layer, a new layer from background, or I will simply say you normally will use a new adjustment layer. So here we go. Let's use the same adjustment I made earlier, brightness contrast, and that's what you have. Now what you see here is something different. So let me close this out here. Let me duplicate this for the sake of it. Image, adjustment, brightness contrast, right? Look at this. What you see is the image here, right? Let me turn this off. And now this will not impact what I do here. Now I turn this on. And you see this symbol which indicates brightness adjustment, and this is what you call a mask. This white mask effectively tells you that anything I do is going to be visible, but I'll make a separate video about masks again later. So I click this, and now I go here, and that's it. Now I will go back to layer, new adjustment layer, curves 1, here we have it. Again, the same thing, this little symbol indicates I'm using a curve layer. Click this, make this change, make this change, here we go. But now if I don't like what I have done, I can go back to this layer, I can brighten it further or darken it further, and I have the ability to make the adjustments post facto if I want. I can go back here and say, no, I want to do this. So the advantage of using adjustment layers is that you are following a process which is A, non-destructive, and B, I would say iterative. And when I say iterative, I can go back and forth between these layers and keep making adjustments until I'm happy with what I've got. Here we have one, there we go. And if I don't like the adjustment on this, I take what is called a black brush and reduce the size of the brush, and I'll simply take off any adjustment I made in this area. In the same way I do in the layers area, So now you can see this is not so dark, but it looks a bit ugly. So this is a short video to tell you about layers and the advantages of using layers. So later when I actually start to show you a few or make a few editing images, later when I start to make a few editing videos, at least hopefully you'll understand the basic concept of layers. But before I do that, I'll make one unmasking. Now, if you want to understand esoteric techniques, I would suggest, or I will give the links of a few other photographers, go through their channels, and they will teach you all the esoteric stuff much better than I can ever do. But what I will do is take you through my workflow, and at every point I will take you through my thought process as it evolves during the editing process. When I am making or editing a photograph for myself, maybe for my website, I will use Photoshop. When I'm editing images for my Substack publication, I use Luminar, which is a much simpler process. I can copy paste adjustments and edit a lot of images very fast. But I don't use Luminar for images which I want for myself, but I might just use one or two of the tools in Luminar to add an effect if I want. But that's about it, and that I will do. I will talk about that again much later. So I'm going to close this image and I won't save it, so none of the changes will affect the base image. And I hope you've enjoyed this little video, even though I have been stuttering a little bit, but that will change in the future. So see you next time, and take lots of images.